Hello, my name is Carson Wentz. I'm 29 years old, struggling through the early days of starting a business in A's tiny apartment in Atlanta, where grand dreams collide with harsh realities. I'm not one to dwell on the past, but some memories are like sharp blades, cutting into my heart whenever I accidentally brush against them. They remind me of the golden days, of family, of my mother, and of the fateful day that took everything away. Let me tell you my story, a story that begins with the most beautiful days, before everything shattered. I was born and raised in Dalton, Georgia, a small town known as the carpet capital of America. But for my family, it wasn't just about carpets. It was about textiles, the clothing industry that elevated the Wentz name. My father, Marshall Wentz, owned the largest garment factory in the region. A tall, stern man with a warm smile that could melt any heart. He was the kind of person who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. Not because of power, but because his presence exuded a strong, reliable energy. My mother, Grace, was his complete opposite, gentle, soft, like a spring breeze. She had warm brown eyes that sparkled when she looked at me, as if I were her entire world. Our home was a stately mansion on a hill, surrounded by my mother's rose bushes that bloomed year-round. I remember summer afternoons when golden sunlight streamed through the living room windows, and my mother would sit in an armchair, reading to me in a voice as soothing as a melody. My father was often busy, but when he was home, our family gathered around the dining table, laughing and sharing stories. As an 8-year-old boy, I only knew that I was living in a perfect world where nothing could break our happiness. But life, as you know, never lets beautiful dreams rest in peace. Everything changed one April afternoon just after I turned 9. That was the day my memories were stained red with blood and pain. That day, my mother took me to a park near our house. I was running around on the grass, holding a kite my father had just bought me, when suddenly my mother pulled me back, her voice soft but urgent. "Carson, get behind me now." Confused, I didn't understand what was happening, only that my mother stood in front of me, her small shoulders trembling. Before us was a stranger, dressed in a black jacket, his face obscured by a baseball cap. He held a gun, his voice shaky but threatening. "Hand over the boy and no one gets hurt." My heart pounded, not out of fear, but because I could feel the tension radiating from my mother. She didn't respond, only held me tightly, pushing me further behind her. "No," she said firmly. "You're not touching my son." The man growled, raising the gun higher. Everything happened so fast. I heard my mother's voice, "Run, Carson!" But my feet felt nailed to the ground. Then came the gunshots, 1, 2, 3, like hammer blows shattering the air. I fell, not because I was hit, but because my mother had shielded me with her body. She collapsed, blood spreading across the green grass, her warm brown eyes slowly closing. I screamed her name, crawling to hold her, but all I could feel was the warmth slipping away from her body. My father appeared, running to us, kneeling beside her, crying out like a child, "Grace! Grace, don't leave me!" But she didn't answer. She was gone forever. The killer was apprehended by the police shortly after. He was a desperate addict, drowning in debt, who thought kidnapping the son of a wealthy family would change his life. But he hadn't anticipated that my mother, a small woman, could be so strong, willing to sacrifice her life to protect me. He was arrested and convicted, but that did nothing to ease the pain in my father's heart or mine. My mother was gone, and with her a part of my heart died too. In the days that followed, our large house became cold and empty. My father, once a symbol of strength, was now a shadow of himself. He spent hours in his study, eyes red, clutching their wedding photo. I couldn't sleep or eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother falling, the blood pooling on the grass, the gunshots echoing in my mind. I was only 9, but I had already learned how cruel life could be. My father tried to be there for me, but he was grappling with his own grief. He hugged me, whispering that everything would be okay. But I knew he didn't believe his own words. We, father and son, were trapped in a spiral of grief, unsure how to escape. I began to wonder if my mother's death was my fault. If I hadn't been there, if I had run faster, if I hadn't made her protect me. Those questions gnawed at my soul, making me withdraw, quieter than before. I was no longer the carefree boy who ran through the park. In the years that followed, I wasn't much different from my father, living like a shadow in our own home. He continued running the company, but the light in his eyes had gone out. He tried to make up for it with gifts and trips, but nothing could fill the void my mother left behind. I began to realize that pain isn't just something you feel in a moment. It's a companion always there, silently following you no matter how far you try to run. But that was only the beginning. My life was about to face another shock, a new wound I never saw coming. Just when I thought I had hit the bottom of my pain, another woman entered our lives, bringing new waves ready to drown everything. I was 12 years old when my father brought her home. Natasha. Her name rang out like a discordant note, sharp and foreign in a house already steeped in sorrow. I vividly remember that evening, the chandelier in the dining room casting light on her face. A beautiful face, I must admit, with shimmering blonde hair and cold green eyes like a frozen lake. My father stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a strained smile on his lips. "Carson," he said cautiously, "this is Natasha. She's going to be part of our family." I stood frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the table, feeling as if the blood in my veins was boiling. Part of our family. Our family was 3 people, my father, my mother, and me. But my mother was gone, and now the man who had once knelt sobbing beside her body was standing here, introducing another woman as if my mother had never existed. I looked at my father, searching his eyes for some trace of the man I once knew, but all I saw was exhaustion and a hint of pleading. He wanted me to accept her. I couldn't. I turned on my heel and stormed to my room, ignoring his voice calling after me, "Carson, wait!" From that day on, Natasha officially entered our lives and everything began to crumble. She was nearly 20 years younger than my father, always dressed extravagantly as if living in an endless gala. She brought with her a heavy perfume that overpowered the scent of the roses my mother had lovingly tended in the garden. I hated the way she moved through the house, as if she were its true mistress, ordering the staff around and changing everything. The curtains my mother had chosen were replaced with garish red silk. The painting my mother had made for the living room was taken down, swapped for a large, gleaming mirror. Each change was a knife to my heart, as if Natasha were deliberately erasing every trace of my mother from our home. But the physical changes weren't what hurt the most. It was my father. He began to change, not immediately, but gradually like a ship drifting further from shore. He spent more time with Natasha, laughed more when he was with her, and I felt the distance between us growing. I no longer saw him sitting in his study, clutching their wedding photo. Instead, I saw him and Natasha traveling, attending parties or discussing plans I was never invited to join. I became an outsider in my own home. When Natasha got pregnant, things got even worse. Aiden was born when I was 13, and 2 years later came Haley. Those children, with their blonde hair and green eyes identical to their mothers, were living proof that my father had fully moved on to a new chapter, one that didn't include me. Natasha didn't hesitate to boast that Aiden and Haley were my father's new joy, as if I had never been his joy. I overheard her talking to friends on the phone, her voice sweet but icy. "Carson? Oh, he's just a kid from the old marriage. Not that important." Those words, though not spoken directly to me, found their way into my ears like poison seeping into my blood. Natasha never treated me like a mother would. She bullied me in the subtlest ways, sarcastic remarks, disdainful glances, or deliberately ignoring me during family dinners. Once when I accidentally broke a glass in the kitchen, she stood up, pointed at me in front of the staff, and said, "He's such a troublemaker, isn't he? No wonder Marshall has to work so hard to support a useless kid." I stood there, 14 years old, clenching my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms, but I said nothing. I didn't want to give her an excuse to make me seem even more pathetic. In the rare moments of clarity he had left, my father tried to reach out to me. He'd knock on my door late at night, when Natasha was asleep, and ask, "Are you okay, Carson? Is there anything you want to talk about?" But I couldn't open up. Every time I looked at him, I saw my mother collapsing in the park, and I wondered how he could keep living, laughing, loving someone else when she had sacrificed everything for me. I responded with curt answers. "I'm fine," or "It's nothing." Then I'd close the door, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. I knew my father was hurting. I saw it in the way he looked at me, in the way his shoulders slumped whenever I refused to talk. But I couldn't forgive him, not then. I felt he had betrayed my mother, betrayed me, and betrayed the happy days we once had. Every time I heard Aiden and Haley's laughter echoing through the house, I felt like I was being erased. The home where I had once felt love was now a cold glass cage, trapping me in loneliness. During those years, I learned to survive. I locked myself in my room, burying myself in books and dreams of the day I could leave. I no longer ran through the garden or sat on the porch watching the sunset. I became a shadow, moving silently through the house I once called home. Natasha and her children took over every space, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a sense of belonging. I started counting down the days until I was old enough to leave. I didn't know that greater challenges lay ahead, or that my pain had yet to reach its depths. But in those years, I learned one thing. Sometimes family isn't the place you're born into. It's the place you have to fight to rediscover yourself. At 18, I stood at the gate of the house I once called home, a suitcase in hand, my heart heavy. I didn't look back as I stepped through the heavy iron gate, where my mother's rose bushes had been replaced by Natasha's meticulously trimmed ornamental shrubs. My father stood on the porch, his tall frame now slightly stooped, as if time had weighed down his shoulders. "Carson," he called, his voice hoarse. "Call me if you need anything, okay?" I only nodded, not turning back. I didn't want to see his eyes, afraid I might weaken, run back to hug him and forgive him. But I couldn't. Not then. I boarded a bus, leaving Dalton for Athens, where the University of Georgia awaited me. A full scholarship was my ticket out of the cold glass cage of that house. I brought nothing but a few clothes, a photo of my mother, and a heart full of scars. Athens was a new world, tree-lined streets, bustling lecture halls, and unfamiliar faces who knew nothing of my past. For the first time, I felt I could breathe, even if those breaths were halting. College life wasn't easy. I worked at a cafe, waiting tables from early morning to late at night to cover expenses beyond my scholarship. On long nights, I sat in my dorm studying until my eyes burned, not out of ambition, but because I knew I had no fallback. I had no family to lean on, no one to call when everything fell apart. Natasha, Aiden, and Haley lived in the stately Dalton mansion, while I crammed into a tiny dorm room, surviving on instant noodles and cold coffee. I majored in engineering, but deep inside, a burning idea took hold, bringing technology to the textile industry, the industry my father had devoted his life to building. I didn't know why I chose this path. Perhaps it was the only way I felt connected to him, even if by a fragile thread. I studied automation in production lines, exploring how AI could optimize garment manufacturing processes. I dreamed of a day when I'd stand on my own 2 feet, without needing the Wentz name or a single penny from my father. After graduating, I landed a job at a tech company in Atlanta. The pay was good, the environment professional, but I wasn't satisfied. I didn't want to work for someone else forever. At 25, I quit, pouring all my savings into starting my own business. My idea was software that integrated AI to help garment factories reduce waste and increase efficiency. It sounded simple, but the reality was a string of sleepless nights, failed investor meetings, and moments when I teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. Some nights, sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at a bank balance of a few $100s, I wondered if I was destroying myself. But I never called my father. Never. My relationship with him was nearly non-existent. Occasionally, his assistant would send an email checking in, or a secretary would call saying he wanted to meet. I always declined, citing busyness. Once he sent a birthday card with a check. I tore up the check immediately but kept the card, because of the handwritten note in his scrawled handwriting. "I'm proud of you, Carson. Even if you don't need me, I'm always here." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say when my heart was still full of unhealed cracks. I lived alone, but I grew accustomed to it. Loneliness had become a part of me, like an old scar on my skin. I didn't need anyone's pity, didn't need anyone to pull me out of the mire. I only needed myself, and I believed that one day I would prove I didn't need anyone, not even my father. At 29, a call from an unknown number turned my world upside down. I was in my office, a cramped rented corner in an Atlanta industrial park, when my phone buzzed. The woman's voice on the other end was cold, like she was reading from a script. "Carson Wentz? I'm Mr. Marshall Wentz's assistant. He's in the hospital. Lung cancer, terminal stage. He wants to see you." I sat frozen, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Lung cancer, terminal stage. The words hit me like bullets to the chest. My father, the tall, strong man who had once been the center of my world, was now lying in a hospital bed, fighting death. I don't know how long I sat there, only that when I stood, my legs trembled and a part of me, one I had buried long ago, began to crack. I returned to Dalton for the first time in over a decade. The house on the hill was still the same, but it felt foreign, as if I were an unwelcome guest. Natasha opened the door, her cold green eyes scanning me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "He doesn't need you here." I didn't respond, brushing past her to enter the house. Aiden and Haley, now teenagers, looked at me like I was a stranger. "Who are you? Why are you in our house?" Haley asked, her tone mirroring Natasha's. I didn't care. I was there for my father, not them. My father's bedroom was now a cold place, filled with the smell of antiseptic and the hum of machines creating a heavy atmosphere. He lay in bed, so thin I barely recognized him. His hair was snow white, his skin pale and his eyes sunken. He was no longer the towering man who used to carry me on his shoulders when I was a child. A nurse stood by his side, checking the heart monitor and the IV bag hanging beside the bed. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, if only for a moment. "Carson, you came," my father whispered, his voice weak but filled with emotion. I quietly sat down in the chair beside his bed, taking his hand, hoping to give him some strength. I stayed for a few days to support my father, and those days were a series of silent battles. Natasha and her children seized every opportunity to make things difficult. They didn't let me sleep in a bedroom, claiming there wasn't enough space. I was forced to sleep in the living room. When I sat talking with my father, they would interrupt, saying I was tiring him out. Once, while I was sitting by his bedside, reading a book we both loved, Natasha stormed in, snatched the book, and threw it into a corner. "Don't bring useless things in here. You're just making him more tired." I clenched my fists, swallowing my anger only because I didn't want to upset my father. But one night, when Natasha and the kids were asleep, I slipped into my father's room. The nurse had just left to check on medications, and the room was lit only by the dim glow of a bedside lamp. My father stirred as I sat down, his eyes lighting up briefly before welling with tears. "Carson," he said, his voice trembling almost a whisper, "I've followed your journey all these years. I know how hard you've worked, how much you've struggled. I wanted to help you, but I didn't know how. I was afraid you still hated me." My throat tightened, seeing him lying there, frail and full of regret. I no longer saw the man who had married Natasha, who had left me alone in my own home. I saw only my father, a man facing death, trying to make amends for his mistakes. "Dad," I said, my voice breaking, "I don't hate you. I just didn't know how to forgive." He grasped my hand, his cold, trembling fingers still carrying a surprising strength. "Carson," he whispered, "I can't change the past. I can't fix what I've done to you, to your mother, but I can leave something for your future. I want you to know that I've always believed in you, even if I didn't say it enough." Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time in years I couldn't hold back, letting my own tears fall. I leaned down, hugging him, feeling the faint warmth of his body, and in that moment I knew I didn't want to lose him. Not now. Not when I had just rediscovered a part of him. 6 months later, my father passed away. I received the news from a midnight call while sitting in my small Atlanta apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and a flickering computer screen. Natasha's voice on the other end was icy, devoid of emotion. "Carson, Marshall passed this afternoon. I'm calling to inform you, but you don't need to come. The will has been finalized. There's nothing for you. All the assets belong to me, Aiden and Haley." She paused as if waiting for a reaction, but I stayed silent. "Did you hear me?" she pressed, her voice sharp. I whispered, "I understand," and hung up, not giving her a chance to say more. I sat there in the dark, feeling as if a piece of my heart had shattered. I didn't care about the will or the assets. I was devastated because I wasn't there for my father's final moments. Natasha and her children had done everything to keep me away from him, barring me from staying at the house, interrupting every conversation, turning every moment with him into a battle. My father died without me holding his hand one last time, without me saying goodbye. That pain, more than the loneliness of the past years, cut into my chest like a knife. Still, I returned to Dalton for the funeral. I stood quietly in a far corner of the cemetery, under the shade of an old oak tree, watching from a distance as my father's coffin was lowered into the ground. Natasha stood among the crowd, dressed in an expensive black dress, her eyes dry behind large sunglasses. Aiden and Haley stood beside her, feigning sadness but unable to hide their impatience, as if waiting for something greater. I didn't approach, didn't cause a scene, didn't fight for anything. I just wanted to say farewell to my father, even if only in silence. As the funeral ended, the crowd dispersed. Natasha passed by me without a glance, but paused just long enough to hurl a cutting remark. "You don't belong here, Carson. Don't come back." Aiden, now 16, smirked. "Yeah, you're not family." Haley, younger but no less venomous, chimed in. "Mom's right, you're just trouble." I didn't respond, only lowered my head, letting them walk away, the sound of Natasha's high heels echoing on the gravel path. Inside, anger flared, but I held it back. This wasn't the time for arguments. This was the time to say goodbye to my father. When everyone had left the cemetery, I stood alone before my father's grave. The stone headstone bore his name, Marshall Wentz, simple yet dignified, like the man himself. I placed my hand on the stone, feeling its cold surface, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I wasn't there when you needed me most." Tears fell silently, soaking into the earth. I don't know how long I stood there, only that the pain in my heart was like a wave, rising and receding, leaving behind a numbing void. Suddenly, a low, gentle voice spoke behind me. "You're Carson, aren't you?" I turned to see an older man with silver hair, dressed neatly in a black suit. He extended his hand, his smile kind but his eyes sharp. "I'm Henry Grayson, your father's personal attorney." I nodded, slightly wary. "Hello, sir. Is something wrong?" I wasn't expecting anything from this encounter. After Natasha's words about the will, I had braced myself for nothing but painful memories. Mr. Grayson looked at me, his gaze piercing. "Do you have a moment? There are some things about your father I think you should know." I hesitated but nodded. We walked to a small cafe near the cemetery where the smell of coffee mingled with the damp afternoon air. He ordered 2 black coffees and sat down, opening his briefcase to pull out a thick stack of documents. "Carson," he began, his voice slow but firm, "before your father passed, He established an irrevocable trust, a trust that cannot be altered. The majority of his valuable assets were transferred into it, and the sole beneficiary is you. I blinked, unable to believe my ears. What did you say? My heart raced, not out of greed but from shock. Natasha said the will left everything to her and her kids. Mr. Grayson smiled, a mix of sadness and mischief in his expression. The will is only part of the story. Marshall was a smart man. He knew exactly what was happening in his family. He wanted to ensure you were protected, that you received what you deserve. He slid the documents toward me. The trust includes the textile factory, the main Dalton mansion, the horse racing track, the yacht, and most of his investment portfolio. It all belongs to you. I sat stunned, feeling the air in the cafe grow heavy. I flipped through the documents, seeing numbers, asset names, and my father's signature, the same scrawled handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards. Tears welled up again, not for the value of the assets, but for what they meant. My father had thought of me, even when I pushed him away. He had believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. He set up this trust 3 years ago, Mr. Grayson continued, his voice softening. He told me you were the only one who understood the true value of the work he'd built. He wanted you to carry on his legacy in your own way. I bowed my head, trying to hold back tears. Thank you, Dad, I whispered, knowing he could no longer hear me. In that moment, I was both grieving his loss and grateful for the gift he left behind. Not just the assets, but the faith I had been searching for all these years. In the days following my father's death, my life in Atlanta drifted through a haze. I returned to my small apartment, where the neon lights from the street outside cast shadows on the cracked walls. Each day I woke up, worked, met with investors, and fought to keep my startup from collapsing. But everything felt meaningless. I couldn't shake the image of my father lying in his hospital bed, his trembling hand grasping mine, or the sound of his frail voice during our last conversation. I had forgiven him, but I still hadn't forgiven myself for letting the distance between us linger for so long. Mr. Grayson's words about the trust echoed in my mind. The textile factory, the mansion, the horse racing track, the yacht. These weren't just assets. They were my father's legacy, his life's work. I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me was overwhelmed, as if I'd been handed a key to a world I never dared to dream of. But a larger part was weighed down by grief. I didn't want the assets. I wanted my father back, to tell him I understood, that I no longer resented him. Every night I sat before a photo of my mother and father on my desk, wondering if I was worthy of the faith he had placed in me. Then one morning my phone buzzed. Mr. Grayson's number flashed on the screen. His voice was steady, like a guide in a storm. Carson, the reading of your father's will is scheduled for this Friday at my law office in Dalton. You should be there. It was his wish, to settle everything. I gripped the phone, my heart racing. I didn't want to face Natasha, Aiden, or Haley again. Their venomous words at the funeral still rang in my ears, cutting into unhealed wounds. But if this was what my father wanted, I couldn't refuse. I'll be there, I replied, my voice soft but resolute, as if convincing myself. On Friday, I drove back to Dalton, the familiar road now tinged with an unfamiliar feeling. The fields stretching along the highway, the rooftops peeking through the faint sunlight, all reminded me of the days I'd lost. I parked in front of Mr. Grayson's law office, a small but elegant building with large windows overlooking the bustling town street. Dressed in a simple black suit, I walked in with a heavy heart, like a gladiator stepping into an arena. I didn't know what awaited me, but I sensed a vague tension, as if the air was compressed, ready to explode. Inside the meeting room, the atmosphere was so tense it made my skin prickle. Natasha sat at the head of the table, wearing a tight black dress, her icy green eyes sweeping over me like they could tear me apart. She sat upright, chin raised, exuding the smug confidence of someone certain of victory. Aiden and Haley, seated beside her, smirked as I entered, Aiden, with his tousled blonde hair and arrogant gaze, whispered something to Haley, making her giggle. Next to them was a man I'd never met, tall with platinum hair, dressed in an expensive gray suit but with cunning eyes like a wolf stalking prey. "That's Russell, Natasha's brother," Mr. Grayson whispered as I sat beside him. "He always shows up when there's money to be sniffed out." "What's he doing here?" Natasha snapped, her voice sharp as a blade, not bothering to hide her contempt. "I told you, Carson, there's nothing for you. Don't waste our time." Russell let out a loud laugh, slapping the table as if watching a comedy. "Yeah, kid," he said, his deep voice dripping with mockery. "My sister's got everything handled. You're just extra baggage." Aiden and Haley snickered, their eyes like arrows aimed to wound me. I didn't respond, sitting silently, hands clasped tightly under the table to suppress the anger boiling in my chest. I wasn't there to argue or prove anything. I was there for my father, for his promise that everything would be settled. Mr. Grayson, calm as a conductor in a storm, stood and opened the thick stack of documents before him. "We are here to carry out the final wishes of Mr. Marshall Wentz," he said, his voice low and clear, resonating in the tense room. "I will read his official will. Please maintain order." Natasha raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair with a smug expression, as if she already knew the outcome. Russell sat close to her, whispering something, his eyes never leaving me, as if assessing whether I was worth bothering with. Aiden and Haley exchanged knowing glances, as if anticipating a show about to begin. I sat there, feeling each heartbeat like a countdown to something I couldn't yet grasp. The air in the room was heavy, as if a storm was about to break. I didn't know what was coming, but deep down I felt a flicker of hope, not for the assets, but because I believed my father, even in death, had one final thing to say to me, and I knew, whatever it was, it would change everything. Mr. Grayson adjusted his glasses, flipping to the first page of the will, his eyes scanning the text, and I felt my heart beat faster. Natasha raised an eyebrow, a smug smile flickering across her lips. Russell leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table as if awaiting a neatly wrapped gift. Aiden and Haley exchanged glances, then turned to me, casting contemptuous looks. Mr. Grayson began. "I, Marshall Wentz, being of sound mind, declare that all my remaining assets shall be bequeathed to my wife, Natasha Wentz, and our 2 children, Aiden Wentz and Haley Wentz." The room erupted. Natasha clapped her hands, the sharp sound echoing in the space. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with triumph, a venomous smile spreading across her face. "See, Carson," she said, her voice sweet but laced with thorns. "I told you there's nothing for you. You're nothing to this family." Aiden burst out laughing, his laughter like a slash. "Wow, big brother, maybe you should go back to your failing startup dreams." Haley, no less vicious, added, "Mom's right. You're just a loser, Carson. Stop bothering us." Russell, with the look of someone who just won the lottery, slapped Natasha's shoulder, laughing loudly. "You did great, sis. The old man finally knew who his real family was." They laughed. They mocked. They looked at me as if I were a stray dog left on the roadside. I sat silently, my hands clenched under the table, feeling the blood boil in my veins. But I said nothing. I just looked at Mr. Grayson, waiting. There was something in his eyes, a mischievous glint, almost imperceptible, that made me feel this wasn't over. Mr. Grayson raised a hand, signaling for silence. "I'm not finished," he said, his voice calm but carrying an odd weight. Natasha stopped laughing, though her smug smile remained fixed. He continued. "The assets of Mr. Marshall Wentz, as inventoried and verified, consist of a cabin in the Colorado mountains and a 1998 Ford vehicle." Silence, a deadly silence, enveloped the room, as if the air had been sucked out. The smile on Natasha's face froze, then slowly vanished. Aiden and Haley looked at each other, mouths agape, unable to believe their ears. Russell sat up straight, eyes wide, his voice trembling. "What? A cabin? A junky car?" He turned to Natasha as if seeking an explanation, But Natasha wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on Mr. Grayson, as if she wanted to bore a hole through his calm demeanor. "Are you joking?" Natasha shrieked, her voice high-pitched, almost breaking. "A cabin? An old Ford? What about the valuable assets? The company shares, the mansion, the yacht, the racetrack? Where are they?" She slammed her hand on the table, her red nails scratching the wood, producing grating sounds. Aiden jumped to his feet, face flushed. "This is a scam. The old man couldn't have left just that." Haley, usually so haughty, sat pale and silent, muttering, "No way, no way." Mr. Grayson, maintaining his unnervingly calm demeanor, adjusted his glasses and replied, "I'm not obligated to disclose information about assets not included in the will. What I've read is the entirety of Mr. Marshall Wentz's official will." He looked at Natasha, his gaze unwavering, as if he'd prepared for this storm. The room exploded. Natasha leapt to her feet, pointing at Mr. Grayson, nearly screaming, "You're hiding something! Marshall couldn't have done this to me. I was his wife. I stood by him, took care of him." Russell, his smugness gone, pounded the table, roaring, "Show me that will. There's got to be a mistake. No one's stupid enough to leave just a cabin and a junk car to their family." Aiden and Haley began shouting, their voices blending into a chaotic, angry, panicked chorus. I sat there, feeling like I was watching a play whose ending I already knew. I knew about the trust, about the gift my father had left me, the textile factory, the mansion, the racetrack, the yacht, and most of his investment portfolio. I knew that my father, even in death, had found a way to protect me, to believe in me. But I hadn't expected this moment to come so quickly or to bring such a mix of pain and satisfaction. I stood slowly, my gaze sweeping over Natasha, Aiden, Haley, and Russell. They stopped shouting, turning to me with eyes full of rage and suspicion. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm, as if speaking for my father. "The assets you're looking for, the factory, the mansion, the yacht, the racetrack, they're not in the will. My father transferred them into an irrevocable trust, and the sole beneficiary is me." Silence. Once again, the room fell silent, but this time it wasn't just deadly, it was a collapse. Natasha stared at me, eyes wide, her face pale as paper. She staggered, clutching the table's edge, then slumped into her chair as if all her strength had been drained. "No," she muttered, her voice breaking. "It can't be." Then, to everyone's shock, she fainted, her body collapsing to the floor, her blonde hair splaying out like a tattered cloth. Aiden screamed, pounding the table repeatedly, face red. "You're lying! You did something, you bastard!" Haley, for the first time I'd seen her cry, wailed, "Mom! Mom, wake up!" Russell leapt to his feet, pointing at me, his voice trembling with rage. "I'll sue you, Carson. I'll drag you to court. You think you can steal everything?" He turned to Mr. Grayson, growling, "And you're in on this, aren't you?" "I won't let this slide." I stood there, unmoving, saying nothing more. I looked at them, Natasha unconscious on the floor, Aiden shouting like a wounded animal, Haley sobbing, and Russell making empty threats. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound sadness mixed with relief. My father had foreseen it all. He knew who Natasha was, knew how she and those around her would react. And he chose me, not because I was his eldest son, but because he believed I would honor what he'd left behind. Mr. Grayson stood, signaling for a staff member to help Natasha recover. He looked at me, giving a slight nod as if to say I'd done the right thing. I walked out of the meeting room without looking back, but I could hear Russell's shouts and Haley's sobs echoing behind me. The storm had broken, but I wasn't afraid. My father had given me a shield, and I would use it to protect his legacy and my own. The meeting room fell silent as I walked out, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting long streaks of light across the hallway, as if guiding me toward a new beginning. I paused at the law office's door, taking a deep breath, feeling the cool Dalton air fill my chest. In that moment, I felt not just relief but a newfound strength, the strength born from the faith my father had left me. I was no longer the lonely boy in a house filled with hostility, nor the young man struggling with unfulfilled startup dreams. I was Carson Wentz, chosen by my father to carry on his legacy. The following week, I officially took over Wentz Textiles, the factory my father had built from nothing. As I stepped into the plant on the outskirts of Dalton, the smell of fresh fabric and the hum of machinery felt like a familiar symphony. The workers, many of whom had served my father for decades, looked at me with a mix of curiosity and caution. They knew I was Marshall Wentz's son, but they also knew of the years I'd been estranged, the rumors that I'd been disowned. I didn't blame them. I only wanted to prove I was worthy of my father's trust. On my first day, I stood before the management team, my father's former right-hand men. They sat around the conference table, some nodding in greeting, others crossing their arms, waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't try to project authority. I simply said, my voice calm but firm, "My father built this company with his sweat and dedication. I'm not here to tear it down. I'm here to take it further, by combining what he did with what I believe can be done." A few eyes lit up. Others raised skeptical brows. I didn't care. I was used to being doubted. I began restructuring the business immediately. Wentz Textiles, though a major name in Dalton, had fallen behind competitors. Manual production processes, high costs, and a lack of innovation had eroded its market share. I brought the idea I'd nurtured since college, integrating AI into the production line. The software I'd developed for my struggling startup in Atlanta, though not yet successful, became the foundation for a revolution at Wentz Textiles. It optimized fabric cutting, reduced waste, and predicted market demand with unprecedented accuracy. The early days weren't easy. Some veteran workers resisted, fearing machines would replace them. A few old managers quit, unwilling to accept change from a kid like me. But I didn't give up. I held training sessions, sitting down with each team to explain how technology would make their work more efficient, not take their jobs. I worked 18-hour days, from the office to the factory floor, from investor meetings to production line checks. Some nights I slept at my desk, next to a cold cup of coffee and the photo of my father and mother. Slowly things changed. Production soared, costs dropped, and Wentz Textiles began securing major contracts with international brands. Articles started appearing, calling me a promising young entrepreneur or the man reviving Dalton's textile empire. I didn't care much for the praise. For me, each step forward was a way to honor my father, to prove he was right to believe in me. But I couldn't deny the pride I felt seeing the Wentz Textiles logo on export shipments, or hearing workers whisper that Carson's more like his father than we thought. A year later, I was invited for a television interview on a national business channel. I sat in a brightly lit studio, facing a sharp-witted host with a professional smile. She asked about my entrepreneurial journey, how I'd revived Wentz Textiles, and the challenges I'd overcome. I answered briefly, not wanting to boast, but when she asked, "What drove you, Carson? What kept you from giving up, even when everything was against you?" I paused, taking a deep breath. I looked directly into the camera, feeling as if I were speaking to the world and to myself. "For years, I wasn't acknowledged as a son," I said, my voice low but clear. "I grew up in a house where I felt I didn't belong. But my father, he left me something others will never understand: his faith. He believed I could do it, even when I didn't believe in myself. And that's why I'm here today." The studio fell silent, only the faint hum of the cameras audible. The host smiled, but I saw a glimmer of emotion in her eyes. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. Those words, simple as they were everything I wanted to say to my father and to my mother, who had sacrificed everything so I could live. I left the studio, stepping onto Atlanta's streets, where the city lights twinkled like stars. I looked up at the sky, imagining my father and mother somewhere, smiling down at me. I was no longer the lost boy in a cold house, nor the lonely young man in a tiny apartment. I was Carson Wentz, heir to my father's legacy, not just in assets, but in resilience and dignity. And I knew, though the journey ahead was long, I would never walk it alone.